Hi there. This is, what are we on now? Episode 3, I think we are, of Radio Squid Jigger, correct?
Yes.
Yay! Episode 3, which is actually coming a solid week before, or a solid week after episode 2, which for us is sort of something of an accomplishment. On this end of the microphone, my name is Thad. On the other end of the microphone is my very, very good friend, who is named Josh. Josh?
Good evening.
Say hello. There we go.
Hello.
So we are trying out some new technology tonight. We actually will hopefully improve the audio a little bit before we're all done. And we're back to talk. It's actually, I should do a bit of an intro here, because one of the things I've been sort of harping on about this thing that we're doing is that I don't want to be just about the Middle East. But sure enough, the Middle East just keeps on being about the Middle East, and therefore we keep on being about the Middle East. It just does not stop. I mean, do you agree?
Absolutely. We're going to put a moratorium, I think, on it after this time, no matter what they do. Just screw it. Like, I don't care if like Israel nukes Saudi Arabia. We're just going to take like a month off. Okay.
We're going to take a month off, and that's it. Like, we're talking about Paraguay, and that's just all. That's the way it's going to be. There's nothing you can do about it. But not this time, and a lot of that I think is because we've been talking the first two of these that we did about the end game in Syria, and it seems like the end game is coming way faster and way more in a sort of final kind of way than probably even we would have guessed, and we were probably on the front end of guessing how soon that was going to happen. Because, you know, the news has been coming, you know, fast and thick. And why don't you start off a little bit, sort of, there's sort of like a column in the middle of Syria along the Euphrates that has been some of the most contested territory. And it's sort of like a bunch of different groups are swamping on towards it all at the same time. Is that roughly correct?
It's really mostly pro-regime units, but obviously there's the Raqqa operation too. The rock and rollers, as we love to call them. But yeah, just all of it's taking off. Like the momentum just keeps building. It's kind of more like, instead of like rolling down a hill, it kind of seems to be going more like falling off a cliff.
Right. That's a very good metaphor. So, and some are coming from the east, and some are coming from the west. So, just like walk us through a little bit about who's moving where, and maybe start with Raqqa, just because that's the place everybody has heard of, and that's also the place that's probably going to get the most press, right? Because that's been the capital of the caliphate, and I think that's going to be a major sort of propaganda move when that finally falls. So maybe start there, and then sort of let's walk through as we go south. Who's going where?
Okay. Well, the Kurds are firmly they're now entering parts of Raqqa. They're in there on the west. The north, I think, because of how flat the terrain is leading up to the city, make it a little hard to approach. So in the north, they've only gotten as far as a sugar factory outside the city, or just on the edge of the city. But in the west a little bit, and especially in the east. In the east, they've basically driven up against the old city of Raqqa, where the large historical mosque is in the center of it. They're already up against like the old city for coming in from the east side.
So if you were attacking New York, this would be like you're in Newark already. Like you've already gone through Newark.
Yeah, definitely. It'd be kind of like, yeah, New York is kind of not laid out well, but it's if you're attacking Chicago, like, you know, on one side, north or south, you've already pushed up against the lake, and like, you know, you're pushing on the loop, you know.
Right. Exactly.
You're
exactly.
You're right. it's moving quickly.
Right. And so
and it's also moving on a couple of sides, on several sides at once. It's moving relatively quickly, but especially on the eastern side.
Right, and then of course there are going to be refugee problems there, and from what I've read with the stories, we're talking in the low single-digit thousand fighters who are left to resist that inside of Raqqa. Does that sound about right to you? Is that what you've been reading?
I've heard as little as 1,000. Yeah, I think I've heard estimates. I think, you know, in the 1 to 3. Right,
but
that was also kind of at the beginning of this. That's I think that might be already have like trended down by now.
Right. Now, you know, 1,000 guys with guns who are willing to die can take a whole lot of people with them. It's not like this is going to be easy or fun or pleasant. But nevertheless, if you have, a 10-1 or a 15-1 advantage, you're going to win eventually. It's just a matter of time and a matter of how many casualties you're willing to take. So, and that's a relatively small number for, what is not exactly a huge town either. So again, we're talking relatively short term, especially if there are people already in the suburbs now. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah. It is not going to be like Mosul still, they're fighting for the last bit of the last neighborhood of the old city. Has just been, they're still hacking away at it in the last several weeks.
Right.
Right. I do not think it's going to be, and Mosul that's been almost half a year now that city has been being reduced.
Yeah.
But I don't think we're going to see anything like that for this. I mean, I was on the record as saying it would be about a month when it started, and it started pretty much, midweek, first week of June, and right. I'm still sticking to that prediction personally.
Right. Now, then, in terms of U.S. involvement, how much is there in Raqqa? And also, actually, two things now that I think about it. There was also a bunch of oohing and ahhing about the fact that apparently they're using white phosphorus, and apparently there are aerial drops of white phosphorus that are over Raqqa. And obviously, I don't think that the Kurds have planes that can be used to drop white phosphorus. So, the assumption is that the U.S. is helping out a lot in all of this. Is that correct?
There is, a lot of air support. I don't generally have any hard sources for it, but there's a lot of, in the Twitter sphere, it sounds like there's a huge amount of airstrikes. The white phosphorus is actually, basically the white phosphorus is a smoke, like a screening round. You put there's phosphorus that burns, and they're 155 millimeter rounds, and when they pop in the air, it comes down almost like it kind of looks so I feel like it's kind of calling an incendiary is a little off, because as long as you don't pick one up or it's generally fine. But it does use white phosphorus to burn quickly to try and generate smoke.
Right.
But there's a lot of that and a lot of actual airstrikes going on across the city. And they seem to really have taken the gloves off. My impression is that civilian casualties aren't a super huge concern in this operation.
Right.
Maybe just because actual mainstream reporters there to really report on anything.
Right, and that also that's also something that you can say with the white phosphorus as well, is that whether or not it's technically an incendiary weapon or anything like that, it's one of those things that does generate a lot of press and a lot of bad press. It's because it's been banned by certain international organizations under certain circumstances. It's not great optics when you wind up using it. But again, as we talked about before, this is American pilots, American planes, American bombs, American refueling. Like this is not allied forces. This is not friendlies. This is guys like we went to high school with, who are flying these missions over Raqqa and dropping bombs.
Yes, and right. A heavy U.S. I think is actually Marines doing artillery as well. For instance, the white phosphorus is howitzers. There's also definitely, I've seen pictures of a weapon system called HIMARS. It's basically a multiple launch rocket system that's GPS guided and has a range of 100 miles. And they parked one somewhere in the region, and it apparently is doing double duty in the Tabqa area and also Raqqa, because it has the range to pretty much hit both spots when somebody makes a call. So there's not only is there airstrikes, but there is definitely U.S. artillery on the ground supporting this. The howitzers and the rockets are definitely Marine based.
Right. It's on the Marines went in and trained somebody else to do this. This is American soldiers doing this work.
Yes. Absolutely.
Okay. Because, and again, we're talking, a couple of weeks ago where suddenly there were these new stories like America is suddenly getting involved in the Syrian war. It's like, that's been happening for a while now. That's not really news. It might be true, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's news. Okay, so as we start moving south, we talked about this as well. This is sort of, or the way we were talking about it is the Malta Conference. That is, as some kind of political deal, whether it's actually a peace or not, is going to be put together. everyone is sort of jockeying for position on where they get to negotiate from when they sit down at the table. So further on south, who is involved? We say you said pro-regime forces. That can be a whole bunch of different people. So let's try to explain that a little bit.
There's three different thrusts that are moving on the Euphrates River from basically top, middle, and bottom, basically moving west to east. The first is a group called what the Syrians call the Tiger Force, which is technically a militia, pro-regime militia, but is actually one of their best trained and equipped units, and is really their absolute shock troops. We actually did reach a moment where some of the militias in Syria were better trained and better equipped than what was left of the Syrian army in its darkest days. I think that's turning around now with additional recruiting and Russian training, but there was definitely a time where the Tiger Force was probably their best unit, even though technically it's a militia, not officially the Syrian Arab Army, the SAA. Right. They're moving down from the west side of Lake Assad, which is basically the dammed up west side of the Euphrates River.
Right.
And made contact with the Kurds near the Tabqa Dam area. Okay. And are just swiftly in the last, since we talked, swept around that area and appear to be going for a highway that will ultimately take them towards the Deir Zor capital, the province of Deir Zor, and the capital city also named Deir Zor.
Right.
And they seem to be, they initially engaged the YPG briefly. There was airstrikes on both sides. Everyone chilled out, and then they now seem to be doing a wide flank around the Kurdish positions.
Right, which also you have to guess, is a nod and a wink sort of deal. Like, we're not planning on going any further south, so if you go around us, then that's your own damn business.
That seems to be I think we're again seeing the Russian-U.S. hotline thing that we've talked about a couple of times.
Right. Right. So okay. And Deir Zor has actually been a tiny little pocket of regime power throughout this entire war. So the assumption is they're trying to link up with that sort of government control, to the extent there is a government at this point in Syria, the government controlled section that is south of there. Is that correct?
Yeah, they have been isolated for 3 years, I think.
Right.
Only being reinforced by airdrop for 3 years, which is kind
insane.
of incredible. Like, when the movie of this is made in some kind of pro-Syrian, side of it, that will be the Kherson, the Leningrad, or the Stalingrad, that kind of epic thing.
Right, and even the Berlin airlift, which Americans always brag about, was months. It wasn't 3 years.
Yeah.
It's just and the amazing thing is it's also worked. At least as far as we know, there's been no reports coming out of Deir Zor that people are starving to death, that everything has completely gone to hell. But so apparently they've managed to keep it resupplied as well, and also rearmed. Right, they've been shooting at people as well.
Yes, every 2 or 3 weeks or a month or so, ISIS does yet another offensive to try and take it. They did maybe beginning of the year, they did successfully cut the area that was controlled by the government in half, such that the downtown area was one piece and the military airbase that piece. Right. So it's actually two bubbles inside that are not connected. And the airbase isn't usable because it's far too close. It's within easy mortar range, so you can't actually land a plane there. They're still actually only resupplying by drops. But it's still a long, epic battle for them.
Right, amazing. So as we were talking about can you hear me still?
Yeah.
Drop out there?
No, okay. You're there.
The guess is that those Syrian, I don't know, I don't want to call them, they're somewhere in between a militia and a proxy and regular Syrian army. They're clearly allied with not just the Russians or not just the Kurds. These are people who want the government back. And exactly, again, who puts their uniforms on them is a different question. But you have pro-regime forces that are trying to link up with actual regime forces that are still in Deir Zor. And that's coming from east to west and south. Is that right?
Yeah, they're following the river from Lake Assad and moving south, but they're looping around the Kurds. So kind of north to south to kind of a southeast direction. Farther south in a straight east to west move is actual Syrian Arab army coming out of Palmyra, where ISIS felt it necessary to blow up, ancient artifacts for a while.
Yeah.
That's been.
Go ahead. Can you hear me?
Yeah. So they successfully took Palmyra back maybe several months ago and have pretty much conquered the entire area and are now pushing down the east-west highway that goes directly to Deir Zor. And it looks like the Tiger Force is moving southeast to move to that eastern thrust, and will basically bypass and pocket some ISIS-held territory behind them, but it's mostly it's ISIS territory in the sense that it's open desert and there isn't really anybody there. It's just that nobody's bothered to walk there and, killed a half dozen guys who are still there kind of thing.
Right. And that's also true of a fair bit of this territory as well. One of the reasons that it can be moved through relatively quickly is because there aren't a whole lot of people there, right?
Yeah, it's mostly, this entire region is mostly empty until you hit the river area itself, which then gets much more populated and has a much larger, not only is populated, but also has a large amount of farmland important to Syria for food.
Right. And so is the assumption that the Tiger forces and the SAA are actually going to meet probably at Deir Zor? Is that the best guess at this point?
One's moving down a southeasterly highway towards the east-west highway that's coming from Palmyra, so they should link up from where they are now, about halfway to Deir Zor. Those two highways merge, and at that point, it looks like they would carry on together down that highway for the rest of the way, is what it looks like is happening.
Okay. So that's one group, distinctly pro-regime, probably headed towards the same direction. And then coming from the other direction, we have...
further south, we have... we were talking about the U.S.-supported and also probably Jordanian-supported Free Syrian Army to the south that we often call the New Syrian Army. They officially... one of their official English translation names is the Eastern Lions.
Yes.
There's a highway going to Al Tanef that then goes into Iraq that they're centered in the Al Tanef area. They attempted to take that and kick them out of it, and the U.S. bombed them several times in a row. And the last bombing, I think, destroyed like a couple dozen vehicles, including self-propelled artillery and some heavy equipment. And so that stopped. But what they did do then is loop clear around Al Tanef and hit the Syrian-Iraqi border and basically pocketed the Eastern Lions such that they can no longer push towards the Euphrates River without actually fighting through pro-regime forces. And this group is Hezbollah and other militias associated with Hezbollah, this particular branch.
Right, and so the difference there is they're still essentially pro-regime. They're definitely not anywhere near the same degree of sort of regular Syrian army. And why is this particular piece of real estate important enough that both the U.S. would stick their noses in there, and probably the Jordanians would stick their nose in the air, and then other militias who are again pro-regime in one sense or another would be pushing so hard against that? Like, what's the value of that little pocket of land?
Well, both sides claim that they want to move down the Syrian border towards Al-Qim and Abu Kamal, which is basically two large towns on opposite sides of the Syrian-Iraq border on the Euphrates River.
Right.
What I think is really happening is that the pro-Iraqi, the pro-Iran militias in Iraq want to link up with the Hezbollah and the other pro-Iran militias in Syria and actually have a joint corridor together. And they have accomplished that. They have met up there, and they have reinforced themselves there on both sides. The Iraqis have sent additional troops, and the Syrians, Hezbollah and other militias have sent additional troops. But the one thing that the Eastern Lions and the United States have managed to do is basically keep them off the main highway. They have to use much more secondary roads to try and get where they're going.
Right.
And ultimately, they seem to be they're now in control of the T3 pumping station, which has a small road and an airfield, and it ultimately goes to the T2 station, which ultimately goes to Abu Kamal, Al Kahim, that area. So it looks like they're going to try and press through that. They're going to use that axis to try and attack the base of the Euphrates River Valley, which was the original U.S. plan as far as I can tell, but it looks like they've been cut off and that they're going to have to abandon that plan. So that's the third prong from the Syrian side.
Right. And so again, what I find interesting about this in particular is that, the part of the math when you're dealing with the U.S. military in any situation like this, and very, very few organizations are more aware of this fact than Hezbollah, is that if the U.S. wants to take a piece of land and is willing to sacrifice a relatively small number of human lives and a whole lot of money, the U.S. can take it. Right, there's no one can stop the United States military from doing that. So essentially, what the other sides are doing in this fight is they're trying to make it sufficiently unpleasant in terms of both, operations on the ground and also in the amount of work and effort and money and politics it takes back in the U.S. to be involved in this war. So essentially, they're trying to do a death by 1,000 cuts routine on that little southern crossing between Syria and Iraq. Would you agree with that?
Yes, they put enough effort behind it, and after being bombed several times, they've just consistently and persistently pushed. And when the United States did publicly declare that anything within 50 kilometers of Al Tanf would be bombed if they approached it, they just decided to go through much smaller roads and open desert and go around that bubble, much in the same way that they're going around the Kurds in the north. Right. They decided for the moment not to pick that fight with the U.S. and to just go around them, but still press on to the Euphrates Valley to try and get there before any U.S. units can do it. Or U.S.-supported proxies, I should say.
And one of my favorite quotes about irregular warfare was from one of the guys I read all the time, and he said there's a fourth dimension to irregular warfare, and that's time. Because if you're there, eventually the Americans are going home. Like, the Americans are not going to stay at that base for the next 25 years. So you're talking about being just annoying enough so you don't lose, but also annoying enough so that the U.S. winds up getting sick and tired, or like you say, just draws a line in the sand and says, okay, we're not going to risk any more of our lives beyond 50 kilometers outside of point X. And if you're willing to respect that, and 50 kilometers around point X is enough for you to do what you want to do, then the Americans are going to leave. They're not going to stay there forever. They're not going to sit there forever. So it's in a longer strategic sense, it sort of makes sense, even if operationally over the first couple of months you're doing it, you're going to wind up losing some artillery, and you're going to wind up losing a certain number of guys as well. So then, and then is the idea that once these groups can, because then the people we're talking about on the Iraqi side are the PMUs. So these are, again, as non-governmental militias go, they're pretty governmental, right? So, I mean, they have very serious political clout inside of Iraq. So it's not like they're dudes with trucks. They're somewhere in between that and regular army, and they're trying to link up with them coming from Iraq, correct?
Yeah, and they've done that in the Al Tanf area, farther north. They've done that. It's farther in the south. There's another really successful PMU push that actually came from the Al-Baj area and has also moved down the Syrian border, and that's it's also kind of looking down towards Deir Zor from the east.
That's actually news to me.
It's kind of northeast of Deir Zor. Unfortunately, in their case, the Kurds are on the other side of the border, and the Kurds have control of most of the roads or highways that would be remotely useful to get into Syria. And the other thing is that hypothetically, while these units are very pro-Iran, and in the case of the Iraqi units approaching Al Tanf, they were, I believe, actually swear allegiance to Al Khamenei. But while they're very pro-Iran, they hypothetically come under the jurisdiction and cooperate with the Iraqi government. And generally, it's always been stated that they will never cross the border. But I think what you're again saying to your fourth dimension and to your shaping of the post-war situation, they seem to be staking out ground where they could, if something radically changed or if they needed to jump over the border at a later time, they seem to be setting up to be able to do that, while at the same time trying their best not to make any overt moves that make the U.S. do something rash in Iraq. Since it clearly wouldn't be like a huge, problem for the United States to start dropping bombs on that side of the border and just say, I don't know what you're talking about. So they seem to, for the moment, be staying on their side of the border, but seem to be maneuvering to where they could link up at both of these two different junctions to kind of form, I call it the Shia court press, because it does seem like, because the one thing that all of these pro-regime groups and all of the Iraqi groups do have in common is that they are pro-Syrian regime, but also really more broadly pro-Shia, pro-Iran Syria. And so from every direction that they're pushing, we're talking about Shia groups that are generally loyal to Iran, or the PMUs in Iraq, Hezbollah, the Tigers. Some of them are more pro-Syrian, but the Syrian government is kind of at this point just a puppet of Iran anyway. They owe Iran too much.
I might disagree with that. I might disagree with that a little bit, Josh, but go ahead.
All right, but I call it Team Shia broadly. I mean, I say that for the entire kind of Shia-Sunni conflict across the entire region. But in these two countries in particular, we're really seeing from almost like 5 axes, like Team Shia closing in on the Euphrates Valley from the other side of Raqqa almost all the way down to the border. They seem to be kind of pushing that is their goal. Either because they feel they need that valley to control what's left of Syria in the aftermath of the war, or more cynical people are saying that Iran wants to have a direct land link to Syria through Iraq, through Shia-friendly militia areas.
Right, and two things I will say about that. Actually 3 things. About the PMUs. One of the things I thought was interesting was not only did the PMUs when they were going west towards Syria, not only did they stop at the border, they stopped at the border and told a bunch of reporters they were stopping at the border. Which to me was interesting because, again, if you want to be a regular army, you have to act like a regular army. And they went to reporters and said, well, we're not going to cross that border unless the Iraqi government tells us to. Which I thought was interesting because, again, to me that's a political play saying, we are an extension of the government of Iraq. I don't care what anybody else says. This is what we are. You can call us a militia if you want, but that's not the way we think about ourselves. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there's no question that Iran has been treating this entire war and treating keeping the Assad regime as it is now, or in a very, very similar way, as a sort of existential threat. I mean, Syria was the only true friend that Iran has had since the revolution, who has been consistent and has been on their side. So I think the idea of the Shia Crescent is a little bit John Bolton, a little bit, Dick Cheney, a little bit, scare tactics. But I do think that they've been approaching this war from the outset as something that is a life or death situation for the Islamic Republic. That if they lose this, then they might as well just give the entire place over to the Saudis. Now that may not be true, but I think that's been the attitude from the get-go. So then, one of the things we were talking about a couple of weeks ago is there any way that anyone can throw a wrench in this whole thing and screw it up? And it seems to me, if the Americans and their proxies in the South have basically, put together a line that they're not going to go beyond, and the other side isn't fighting against them, and if the Kurds are moving south pretty effectively, and if what is left of the army is going to link up with a very similar group, it doesn't seem like anything that would immediately break this whole thing into a disaster is happening right now. Do you agree with that?
I would agree with that. There were initial fights against the Kurds when they first brushed up against each other, and of course there's heavy bombing in the south, but both sides seem to, and then the Russians counterbombed, in both situations. And then everyone seemed to kind of figure out exactly where the lines were drawn and move around and kind of flows around each other, at least for the moment. When ISIS, exactly. when the Euphrates River Valley is firmly under pro-regime control, it's not clear if they're going to call it a day and negotiate with the other major pockets, or then try and do something, harsh. But for the moment, that they've at least decided that for the moment, the biggest fish to fry is taking Euphrates Valley away from ISIS. And I would note that this effort is practically the only movement in Syria that almost all other government operations or pro-regime operations have ceased, except for these operations we're talking about. There's almost nothing going on except for in the very south of Syria, a population center named Deira, kind of close to the Golan Heights. There's still there's still a lot of SA, like regular Syrian army operations going on there. But almost every other front and every other pocket in Syria has basically there's basically a ceasefire because they've decided that these, all the axes of attack towards the Euphrates River Valley are where they're going and where they're putting their effort.
Yes, and so as you said, for now being the operative phrase there, when there are this many actors in this small a piece of territory, it doesn't mean it's always going to stay. And I was going to say stay quiet, but this is like stay quiet in Syrian civil war terms, which is a pretty screwed up version of quiet. But again, so far it seems as if everyone is agreeing to, certain patches of territory where they won't tread on anybody else's toes to make this get any worse. So that was one of the things that we talked about a couple of weeks ago was, how who can throw a spanner in the works, who can upset this whole cart. And go, team nihilist and just mess it all up. And so far, that doesn't seem to be happening anywhere. And don't know if that's going to be true in 6 weeks. Don't know if it's going to be true in 4 weeks, but that seems to be the way it's going now, correct?
Yeah, I think everyone seems to have worked out their issues and decided that clearing ISIS is the number one priority for everyone who's left standing.
Right. And so administratively, would your guess be that the Kurdish forces coming south are going to stop outside of Raqqa? Would they just hold their ground there?
Well, they've already moved much further down the Euphrates River on the eastern side, and it looked almost like if they'd kept going, they could have gone to Deir Zor if they wanted to. But I'm not quite sure what the next move is for them after Raqqa. They are moving further south down the Euphrates River on the opposite side. They're actually running up against, there's a couple of small towns directly across the river. And they are still advancing in that direction, despite the Raqqa operation. So they're not completely done yet, but I don't see them trying to move on Deir Zor because it seems, one, there are already regime forces inside of it, and two, it looks exceedingly likely, like from at least two axes of attack, that pro-regime forces will get there first. So I think after a while they're just going to cool their jets and kind of just sit on their, they're in a great spot. They took Raqqa. They have several dams. Like, I got a feeling that after the Raqqa operations are done, that they're going to be pretty done. And just as long as nobody shoots at them, I think they're going to sit tight and hold on to the spoils, is my impression.
Right, and Deir Zor isn't a Kurdish town. It's probably not a place that they would want to take over politically anyway. So, in a certain sense, once they get the sort of the big golden prize, both militarily and propaganda wise, of Raqqa, they're kind of done. Wouldn't you say? They've
got more cards than they could. I mean, a year ago they were, if you go back maybe a year and a half ago, they were like almost on death's door trying to fight this thing out, and now they must be controlling, a quarter of the country at this part, and some really prime real estate in terms of Lake Assad, and also, some with a huge feather in their cap once they finish off Raqqa. Yeah. So, I mean, I think they do, and to the extent they've even moved as far south as they have, I get the distinct feeling that because it's ISIS, they don't feel any pressure not to hurt them. But I don't think they have any intention of holding on this land. I think it's the first thing they're going to parlay in a land deal to be like, all right, we're going to get semi-autonomy, and here's all your land back, and you don't even have to fight for it. I think that's what they're working on right now. I think they're buying territory in their risk game to ultimately hand back, such that they get their own place in the sun that is semi-autonomous at the end of this whole deal.
Right.
That's my impression.
And also, as much as we joke about Team Shia and Team Kurd and Team Sunni and Team whatever else, they are one of those people where it's really hard to cheer against them. You know, they're sort of like the Golden State Warriors of the Midwest. Like, you know, they're of the Golden State Warriors of the Mideast. Like, they play good ball. You know, whatever else you say about them, they do stuff the right way. Yeah, it's hard to be especially bitter about them getting a better place at the bargaining table than they already have. So yay, well done, good for you guys. So what do we talk about as a sort of time frame about this? What just throw out some numbers, just ballpark.
I think the Rocca thing is I'm going to stick to like my month time frame, which would put it early July. You know, probably not in time for the 4th. You know, but though that would be kind of sweet. But you know, around pretty something like that. You know, worst case scenario, maybe it takes 6 weeks. As for the next step will be liberating the entire Euphrates River Valley. There are enough towns in there that I think that could take a little bit of time, but I still think it's within our end of year guesstimate that we were saying that this would kind of be wrapped up. And I think once ISIS is completely folded, at least on the Syrian side, then I think we're to the point where we'll see the negotiations we were talking about. And I still think that will happen, you know, in the fall to early winter. Like this will be wrapped up because it just keeps moving. All of the axes are moving down, just keep moving faster and faster because it seems like ISIS has just reached its manpower failure, or it's just run out of stuff to try and fight with.
Right.
That they were very successful for a while because they just seemed to keep winning, but you know, nothing hurts recruitment and morale more than just consistently losing on every front. And I think they're wrapped up, and everything from here on out will just keep moving faster.
Yeah. And again, you know, couldn't happen to a nicer bunch of guys.
Yeah. Don't let the door hit your ass on the way out.
Right, exactly. I will shed no tears for the Syrian Salafists. That's okay. Okay. Well, so then, if we're talking about the end of the year, that also would be a relatively quiet time for American politics. There isn't such a thing as loud politics in Russia, except for a couple of protests now. So. That would seem to be a reasonable time for people to try to sit down, you know, later on this year and actually try to hammer out some kind of deal. Again, assuming no one throws a wrench in this whole mess, no one comes along with a grenade and tries to set it all asunder. But that'll be the time frame that we're talking about, right?
Yeah, and I think by the end of the year, I think we'll see some serious negotiations and generally a ceasefire while those negotiations take place.
Okay. Well, then that's so that's basically our. Is there anything else that you want to cover while we're talking about it, or is that?
No, that's pretty much that's the news.
That's the news. And to catch up a little bit on a couple stories that we talked about before. Our good friends in Qatar, not only. Paid $3.5 million to the law firm of John Ashcroft to check out whether or not they're actually funding terrorism or not. By the way, I would be happy to take $2.5 million to tell them that they're not funding terrorism. I could do that same job. They also spent $12 billion on American F-15s.
I saw that and thought that was hysterical, just because of the timing.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like I mean, you know, in a certain sense, for like, you know, if there were an award for being, you know, internationally politically craven, I mean, you can't do much better than that. Like, you know, we've been those guys who are on your side are threatening to starve us to death. So we'll buy $12 billion in planes that we absolutely do not need.
I didn't really dig into this. Was this a deal I assume this is a deal that's been in progress for a while, because you don't just like pen a $12 billion deal. It's got to be cleared by state, and I didn't look into the details of the deal. It just because I just saw it recently. Like I think it was just today.
It was the past couple days. But I mean, $12 billion is a lot of money. I mean, like even for the U.S. military, right? Like that's a lot of money.
No, that's a lot of white phosphorus, if you will.
That's a big check. So all those things are going on. We'll probably come back at some point and cover those in a little bit more depth because that's about the Middle East too, isn't it? Then we're gonna have as usual, our Middle East moratorium will probably last far less than we would like. So is there anything else that you want to cover on today, or should we call this a relatively quick show? This is like 40 minutes.
Up to you. Did you want to dig into Tehran for a moment, or do we want to let it go?
It's one of those things where it's gotten so little traction in the press that I'm not sure if anyone who speaks English is actually even going to care.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's unfortunate because I think it's a big deal, and I think in the long term it's going to have some pretty major psychological impacts on how that country thinks about the rest of the world. And I think the timing was horrible. It happened a couple weeks after the U.S. was there patting Saudi Arabia on the back. But at the same time, at the end of the day, no one cares. I mean, Josh and I are Facebook friends, and I jokingly said the first morning when that terrorist attack happened, I put something on Facebook saying, well, I'm really, really happy to see all of the, hashtag pray for Tehran things on Facebook as a sort of snotty joke, assuming that all my friends would actually say hashtag pray for Tehran. And literally none of them did.
No one mentioned it. And I like one of your comparisons I thought was really spot on, considering that nobody in the West covered it or protested it or had anything to say about it. Attacking the tomb of Khomeini and also attacking the parliament was, I think the comparison you made was, which I think was very accurate, was like, it's like somebody just attacked Congress and the Washington Monument at the same time for Iranians.
On the same day, exactly, and those were very carefully chosen targets because one of the things that ISIS is always talking about is that they're a state, and Iran says that they are the Islamic Republic of Iran. They always call themselves the Islamic Republic. That we are a legitimate elected government in the Islamic world. So and also there's always been longstanding hassles about the fact that the Shia have shrines to their dead imams, and the hardcore Sunnis say you can't do that. So these targets were chosen very, very carefully, very explicitly. They had very particular residence to anyone who lived in the region, and no one gave a shit. So
no, crickets.
Just like I mean, and like my lefty friends who are on Facebook will post like for days about something that happens in Portland, Oregon. I mean, like a part of the country that even Americans don't care about Portland. And go on and on and on and back and forth and talk about it and change their Facebook, pictures. And then, this happens in a major city in a hugely important part of the world where the U.S. has a lot of involvement, and nothing, whatever. Life goes on. How about those Mets? So there we go. I was all excited to talk about this whole thing in Tehran and what it all means. And apparently it doesn't mean a damn thing. So at some point we may come back to it, but I would say it's probably that 5 minutes is probably enough to cover it for now. So then why don't we wrap this up? That's okay to you?
Yeah, no, easier for the listeners.
All right. So a nice little bite-sized radio squid jigger. I'm actually working on the website right now. But if anyone hears this and wants to get in touch with us, you can email me, TCB, as in taking care of business, at squidjigger.com. And you can also always email Josh at squidjigger.com. And we will be back in a week if all goes well. And if even things go better, we won't be talking about the Middle East.
God willing.
How does that sound to you?
Inshallah.
Dios quiere. All right, there we go. So very good. We'll talk to you all next week. Thanks very much, Josh.
Have a good night.
All right.